Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Homes for Story Time, and we continue with our new book, The Green Mummy. Chapter 3 A Mysterious Tomb. One member of the Braddock household was not included in the general staff. Being a mere appendage of the professor himself, this was a dwarfish, misshapen Kanaka, a pygmy in height, but a giant in breadth. With short, thick legs and long, powerful arms, he had a large head and a somewhat handsome face, with a melancholy black eyes, a fine set of white teeth to boot. Like most Polynesians, his skin was of a pale bronze and elaborately tattooed. Even the cheeks and chin scored with curves and straight lines of mystical import. But the most noticeable thing about him was his huge mop of frizzled hair, which by some process unknown or only known to himself, he usually dyed a vivid yellow. The flaring locks streaming from his head made him resemble a Peruvian image of the sun, and it was this peculiar coiffure which had procured for him the odd name of Cockatoo. The fact that this grotesque creature invariably wore a white drill suit emphasized still more the suggestion of his likeness to an Australian parrot. Cockatoo had come from the Solomon Islands in his teens to the colony of Queensland to work on the plantations, and there the professor had picked him up as his body servant. When Braddock returned to marry Mrs. Kendall, the boy refused to leave him, although it was represented to the young savage that he was somewhat too barbaric for sober England. Finally, the professor had consented to bring him overseas, and never regretted doing so, for Cockatoo, finding his scientific master a true friend, worshipped him as a visible god. Having been captured when young by Pacific black birders, he talked excellent English, and from contact with the necessary restraints of civilization was, on the whole, extremely well behaved. Occasionally, when teased by the villagers and his fellow servants, he would break into childish rages, which bordered on dangerous. But a word from Braddock always quieted him, and when penitent, he would crawl like a whimpered dog to the feet of his divinity. For the most part, he lived entirely in the museum, looking after the collection and guarding it from harm. Lucy had a horror of the court creature's uncanny looks, objected to Cockatoo waiting at the table, and it was only on rare occasions that he was permitted to assist the harassed parlor maid. On this night, the Kanaka acted excellently as a butler, and crept softly around the table, attending to the needs of the diners. He was an admirable servant, deft and handy, but his blue-lined face and squat figure, together with his obtrusively golden halo, rather worried Mrs. Jasser. And indeed, in spite of custom, Lucy also felt uncomfortable when this gnome hovered at her elbow. It looked as though one of the fantastical idols from the museum below had come to haunt the living. "I do not like Gollywog," breathed Mrs. Jasser to her host. "When Cockatoo was at the sideboard, he gives me the creeps. Imagination, my dear lady, pure imagination. Why should we not have a picturesque animal to wait upon us?" "He would wait picturesquely enough at a cannibal fest," suggested Archie, with a laugh. "Don't," murmured Lucy, with a shiver. "I shall not be able to eat my dinner if you talk so." "Odd that Hope should say what he has said," observed Braddock confidently to the widow. "Cockatoo comes from a cannibal island, and doubtless has seen the consumption of human flesh. No, no, my dear lady, do not look so alarmed. I don't think he has eaten any, as he was taken to Queensland long before he could participate in such banquets. He's a very decent animal." "A very dangerous one, I fancy," retorted Mrs. Jasser, who looked pale. only when he loses his temper, and I am always able to suppress that when it is at its worst. You are not eating your meat, my dear lady. Can you wonder at it? And you talk of cannibals. Let us change the conversation to cereals, suggested Hope, whose appetite was of the best wheat, for instance. In this queer little village, I notice the houses are divided by a field of wheat. It seems wrong somehow for corn to be bunched up with houses. That's old Farmer Jenkins, said Lucy vivaciously. He owns 3 or 4 acres near the public house and will not allow them to build anything over it. Although he has been offered a lot of money, I noticed myself, Archie, the oddity of finding a cornfield surrounded by cottages. It's like Alice in Wonderland. But fancy, anyone offering money for land here? Observed Hope, toying with his claret glass, which had just been refilled by the attentive Cockatoo. At the back of beyond, as it were. I shouldn't care to live here. The neighborhood is so desolate. All the same, you do live here, interposed Mrs. Jasser, smartly, and with a roguish glance at Lucy. Archie caught the glance and saw the blush on Mrs. Kendall's face. You have answered your question. Excuse me. You have answered your question yourself, Mrs. Jasser, he said, smiling. I have the inducement you hint at to remain here, and certainly, as a landscape painter, I admire the marshes and the sunsets. As an artist and an engaged man, I stop in Gartley. Otherwise, I should clear out. But I fail to see why a lady of your attractions should. I may have a sentimental reason also, interrupted the widow, with a sly glance at the absent-minded professor, who was drawing hieroglyphics on the tablecloth with a fork. Also, my cottage is cheap and very comfortable. The late Mr. Jasser did not leave me sufficient money to live in London. He was a consul in China. You know, the consuls are never very well paid. I will come in for a large income, however. Indeed, said Lucy politely, and wondering why Mrs. Jasser was so communicative. Soon, I hope. It may be very soon. My brother, you know, a merchant in Pekin, he has come home to die, and he is unmarried. When he does die, I shall go to London. But, added the widow meditatively, and glancing again at the professor, I shall be sorry to leave dear Gartley. Still, the memory of happy hours spent in this house will always remain with me. Ah me, ah me. And she put her handkerchief to her eyes. Lucy telegraphed to Archie that the widow was a humbug, and Archie telegraphed back that he quite agreed to her. But the professor, whom the momentary silence had brought back to the present century, looked up and asked Lucy if the dinner was finished. I have to do some work this evening, said the professor. Oh, father, when you said that you would take a holiday, said Lucy reproachfully, I am doing so now. Look at the precious minutes I am wasting in eating, my dear. Life is short and much remains to be done in the way of Egyptian exploration. There is the sepulchre of the Queen of Tahoser. If I could only enter that, and he sighed, while helping himself to cream. Why don't you? Asked Mrs. Jasser, who was beginning to give up her pursuit of Braddock, for it was of no use wooing a man whose interests centered entirely in Egyptian tombs. I have yet to discover it, said the professor simply. Then, warming to the congenial theme, he glanced around and delivered a short historical lecture. Tauger was the chief wife and queen of a famous pharaoh, the pharaohs of the Exodus, in fact. The one who was drowned in the Red Sea? Asked Archie idly. Why, yes, but that happened later, before pursuing the Hebrews. If the Mosaic account is to be believed, this pharaoh marched far into the interior of Africa, the Libya of the ancients, and conquered the natives of Upper Ethiopia. Being deeply in love with his queen, he took her with him on this expedition, and she died before the pharaoh returned to Memphis. From records which I discovered in the Museum of Cairo, I have a reason to believe that the Pharaoh buried her with much pomp in Ethiopia, sacrificing, I believe, many prisoners at her gorgeous funeral rites. From the wealth of that Pharaoh, for wealthy he must have been on account of his numerous victories, and from the love he bore of this princess. I am confident, added Braddock, striking the table vehemently, that when discovered her tomb will be filled with riches, and may also contain documents of incalculable value. And you wish to get the money? Asked Mrs. Jasser, who was rather bored. Professor rose fiercely. Money? I care nothing for money. I desire to obtain the funeral jewelry and golden masks and precious images of gods, so as to place them in the British Museum, and the scrolls of papyrus buried with the mummy of Tozer may contain an account of the Ethiopian civilization about which we know nothing. Oh, that tomb, Braddock began to walk the room, quite forgetting that he had not finished his dinner. I know the mountains whose entrails were pierced to form the sepulchre. Were I able to go to Africa, I am certain that I should discover the tomb. Ah, with what glory would my name be covered, were I so fortunate. Why don't you try to go to Africa, sir? Just go and try, asked Hope. Fool, cried Professor politely. To fit out an expedition would take some 5,000 pounds, if not more. I would have to penetrate through a hostile country to reach the chain of mountains I speak of, where I know this precious tomb is to be found. I need supplies, an escort, guns, camels, and all the rest of it. A leader must be obtained to manage the fighting men necessary to pass through this dangerous zone. It is no easy task to find the tomb of Towser. And yet, if I could only get the money, and he walked up and down with his head bent on his breast. Mrs. Jasser was used to Braddock's vagaries by this time, and merely continued to fan herself placidly. I wish I could help you with that expedition, she said quietly. I should like to have some of that lovely Egyptian jewelry myself. But I am quite a pauper, until my brother dies. Poor man, then, she hesitated. What then? Asked Braddock, wheeling. I shall aid you with pleasure. It's a bargain. Braddock stretched out his hand. A bargain, said Mrs. Jasser, accepting the grasp somewhat nervously, for she had not expected to be taken so readily at her word. A glance at Lucy revealed her nervousness. Do sit down, father, and finish your dinner, said the young lady. I am sure you will have more than enough to do when the mummy arrives. Mummy? What mummy? Murmured Braddock, again beginning to eat. The Inca mummy. Oh, of course, the mummy of Inca Caxus, which Sidney is bringing from Malta. When I strip that corpse of its green bandages, I shall find. Find what? Asked Archie, seeing that the professor hesitated. Braddock cast a swift look at his questioner. I shall find the peculiar mode of Peruvian embalming, he replied abruptly, and somehow the way which he spoke gave Hope the impression that the answer was an excuse. But before he could formulate the thought that Braddock was concealing something, Mrs. Jasser spoke frivolously. I hope your mummy has jewels, she said. It has not, replied Braddock sharply, so far as I know. The Inca race never buried their dead with jewels. But I have read in Prescott's history that they did, said Hope. Prescott, cried the professor contemptuously. A most unreliable authority. However, I'll promise you one thing, Hope, that if there's any jewels or jewelry, you shall have the lot. Give me some, Mr. Hope, cried the widow. I cannot, laughed Archie. The green mummy belongs to the professor. I cannot accept such a gift, Hope. Owing to circumstances, I have been obliged to borrow money from you. Otherwise, the mummy would have been acquired by someone else. But when I find the tomb of Queen Tozer, I shall repay the loan. You have repaid it already, said Hope, looking at Lucy. Braddock's eyes followed his gaze, and his brows contracted. Huh? He muttered. I don't know if I am right in consenting to Lucy's marriage with a pauper. Oh, father, cried the girl. Archie is not a pauper. I have enough for Lucy and me to live on, said Hope, although his face had flushed. And I had been a pauper, and had I been a pauper, I could not have given you that £1,000. You will be repaid, said Braddock, waving his hands to dismiss the subject. And now, he rose with a yawn. If this tedious feast is at end, I shall again seek my work. Without a word of an apology to the disgusted Mrs. Jasser, he trotted to the door and there paused. By the way, Lucy, he said, turning, I had a letter today from Random. He returns to his yacht, to Pierside, in 2 or 3 days, in fact. His arrival will coincide with that of the diver. I don't see what his arrival has to do with me, said Lucy, tartly. Oh, nothing at all, nothing at all, said Braddock airily. Only I thought that is... But never mind, never mind. Cockatoo, come down with me. Good night, and then he disappeared. Well, said Mrs. Jasser, drawing a long breath, for rudeness and selfishness I commend me to a scientist. We might be all mud for what we notice he takes of us. Never mind, said Mrs. Kendall, rising. Come to the drawing room and have some music. Archie, will you stop here? No, I don't care to sit over my wine alone, said the young gentleman, rising. I shall accompany you and Mrs. Jasser and Lucy. He stopped at the door, through which the widow had already passed. What did your father mean by his hints concerning Random? I think he regrets giving his consent to my marriage with you, she whispered back. Did you not hear him talk about that tomb? He desires to get money for the expedition. From Random? What rubbish. Sooner than that, if our marriage is stopped by the beastly business, I'll sell out and you'll do nothing of the sort, interrupted the girl imperiously. We must live if we marry. You have given my father enough, but if Random lends money for his expedition, he does do this at his own risk. I am not going to marry Sir Frank because of my stepfather's requirements. He has no rights over me, and, whether he consents or not, I will marry you. My darling, and Archie kissed her before they followed Mrs. Jasser into the drawing room. All the same, he foresaw trouble. Chapter 4. The Unexpected. For the next 2 or 3 days, Archie felt decidedly worried over his projected marriage with Lucy. Certainly, he had, to put it bluntly, purchased Braddock's consent, and that gentleman could scarcely draw back from his plighted word, which had cost the lover so much. Nevertheless, Hope did not entirely trust the professor, as, from the few words which he had let drop at the dinner party, it was plain that he hankered after money with which to fit out the expedition in search of the mysterious tomb to which he had alluded. Archie knew, as he did the professor, that he could not supply the necessary £5,000 without practically ruining himself, and already he had crippled his resources in paying over the price of the green mummy. He had fondly believed that Braddock would have been satisfied with the relic of Peruvian humanity, but it seems that the professor, having got what he wanted, now clamored for what was at present beyond his reach. The mummy was his property, but he desired the contents of Queen Tosher's tomb also. This particular moon, which he cried for, was a very expensive article, and Hope did not see how he could gain it. Unless there came in the cause of Archie's worry, unless the £5,000 was borrowed from Sir Frank Random, the professor would have to content himself with the Maltese mummy. But from what the young man had seen of Braddock's longing for a special sepulchre which he desired to loot, he believed that the scientist would not readily surrender his whim. Random could easily lend or give him the money, since he was extremely rich and extremely generous, but it was improbable that he would aid Braddock without a quid pro quo. As the sole desire of the baronet's heart was to make Lucy his wife, it could easily be guessed that he would only assist the professor to realize his ambition on condition that the savant used his influence with his stepdaughter. That meant the breaking of an engagement with Hope and the marriage of the girl to the soldier. Of course, such a state of things would make Lucy unhappy, but Braddock cared little for that. To gratify his craze for Egyptian research, he would be willing to sacrifice a dozen girls like Lucy. Undoubtedly, Lucy refused to be passed along from one man to another like a bale of goods, and Archie knew that, so far as in her lay. She would keep to her engagement, especially as she denied Braddock's right to dispose of her hand. All the same, the professor, in spite of his cherubical looks, could make himself extremely disagreeable, and undoubtedly would do so if thwarted. The sole course that remained, should Braddock begin operations to break the present engagement, would be to marry Lucy at once. Archie would be willingly have done so, but pecuniary difficulties stood in the way. He had never told any one of these, not even the girl he loved, but they existed all the same. For many years he had been assisting needy relatives, and thus had hampered himself in spite of his income. By sheer force of will, as to force Braddock into giving him Lucy, he had contrived to secure the necessary £1,000 without confusing the arrangements he had made to pay off certain debts connected with his domestic philanthropy. But this brought him to the end of his resources. In 6 months, he hoped to be free, to have his income entirely to himself, and then, small as it was, he could support a wife. But until the half year elapsed, he could see no more chance of marrying Lucy with any degree of comfort, and meanwhile she would be exposed to the persecutions of the professor. Perhaps persecutions is too hard of a word, as Braddock was kind enough to the girl. Nevertheless, he was pertinacious in gaining his aims where his pet hobby was concerned, and undoubtedly could see any chance of obtaining the money from Random by selling his stepdaughter, he would do so. Assuredly, it was dishonorable to act in this way, but the professor was a scientific Jesuit, and deemed that the ends justified the means, when any glory to himself and gain to the British Museum was in question. "But I may be doing him an injustice," said Archie, when he was explaining his fears to Miss Kendall on the third day after the dinner party. "After all, the professor is a gentleman, and he will probably hold to the bargain which he has made." "I don't care whether he does or not," cried Lucy, who had a fine color and a certain amount of fire in her eyes. "I am not going to be bought and sold to forward these nasty scientific schemes. My father can say what he likes to, and do what he likes to, but I marry you tomorrow if you like." "That's just it," said Archie, flushing. "We can't marry." "Why?" she asked, much astonished. Hope looked to the ground and drew patterns with his cane point in the sand. They were seated in the hot sunshine, for the Indian summer still continued under the moldering brick wall which ran around the most delightful of kitchen gardens. This was situated at the back of the pyramids, and contained a multiplicity of pot herbs and fruit trees and vegetables. It resembled a fairy garden in Madame Delanoy's story of the White Cat, and in the autumn yielded a plentiful crop of fine flavored fruit. But now the trees were bare, and the garden looked somewhat forlorn for lack of greenery. But in spite of the lateness of the season, Lucy often bought, or I should say brought, a book to read under the glowing wall, and there ripened like a peach in the warm sun. On this occasion, she brought Archie into the old world garden, as he had hinted at confidences, and the time had come to speak plainly, as Hope began to think that he had not treated Lucy quite fairly in hiding from her his momentary embarrassed position. "Why can't we marry at once?" asked Lucy, seeing that her lover held his peace and looked confused. Hope did not reply directly. I had better release you from your engagement, he said haltingly. Oh, Lucy's nostrils dilated, and she threw back her head scornfully. And another woman's name? Who is that other woman? There is no other woman. I love you and only you. But money. What about money? You have your income. Oh, yes, that is sure, small as it is, but I have incurred debts on behalf of an uncle and his family. These have embarrassed me for the moment, and so I cannot see my way to marrying you for at least 6 months. Lucy, I'm so sorry. He caught her hand. I feel ashamed of myself that I did not tell you this before, but I feared to lose you. Yet, on reflection, I see it is dishonorable to keep you in the dark. And if you think that I have behaved badly, well, I do, in a way, she interrupted quickly, as your silence was quite unnecessary. Don't treat me as a doll, my dear. I wish to share your troubles as well as your joys. Come tell me all about it. You are not angry? Yes, I am. At your thinking I loved you so little as to be biased against our marriage because of money troubles. Pooh! She flicked away a speck of dust from his coat. I don't care that for I don't care for things such as that. You are an angel, he cried ardently. I am a very practical girl just now, she retorted. Go on, confess. Archie, thus encouraged to do so, and it was a very mild confession that she heard, involving a great deal of unnecessary sacrifice in helping a pauper uncle. Hope strove to belittle his good deeds as much as possible, but Lucy saw plainly the good heart that had dictated, and giving up this small income for some years, when in possession of all the facts, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. You are a silly old boy, she whispered, as if what you tell me could make any difference to me. But we can't be married for 6 months, dearest. Of course not. Do you believe that a woman can gather together my trousseau in under 6 months? No, my dear, we must not marry in haste to repent at leisure. In another half year, you will enjoy your own income, and then we can marry. But meanwhile, said Archie, after kissing her, the professor will bother you to marry Random. Oh, no. He has sold me to you for 1,000 pounds. There, do not say a single word. I am only teasing you. Let us say that my father has consented to my marriage with you and cannot withdraw his words. Not that I care if he does. I am my own mistress. Lucy, he took her hands again and looked into her eyes. Braddock is a scientific lunatic and would do anything towards his aims with regard to the very expensive tomb which he has yet set his heart on discovering. As I can't lend or give the money, he is sure to apply to Random. And Random will want to marry me, cried Lucy, rising. No, my dear, not at all. Sir Frank is a gentleman, and when he learns that I am engaged to you, he will simply become my dear friend. There, don't worry any more about the matter. You ought to have told me of your troubles before, but as I have forgiven you, there is no more to be said. In 6 months I shall become Mrs. Hope, and meanwhile I can hold my own against any inconvenience that my father may cause me. But he rose and began to remonstrate, anxious to abuse himself still further before this angel of a maiden. She placed her hand on his mouth. Not a word, or I shall box your ears, sir. That is, I shall exercise the privilege of a wife before I become one. And now, she slipped her arm within his. Let us go in and see the arrival of the precious mummy. Oh, it has arrived then? Not here exactly. My father expects it at 3 o'clock. It is now 1:45, and Archie, consulting his watch, as I have been to London all yesterday, did not know what the driver had arrived at Pearisdale. How is Bolton? Lucy wrinkled her brows. I am rather worried over Sidney, she said in an anxious voice. And So is my father. He had not appeared. What do you mean by that? Well, she looked around at the ground in a pondering manner. My father got a letter from Sydney yesterday afternoon actually, saying that the ship with the mummy and himself on board had arrived about 4 o'clock. The letter was sent by special messenger and came at 6. Then it arrived in the evening and not in the afternoon. How particular are you? Said Miss Kendall with a shrug. Well, then, Sydney said that he could not bring the mummy to the place last night as it was so late. He intended, so he told my father in the letter, to remove the case containing the mummy ashore to a near inn and a wharf at Piersdale, or at Pierside, and there would remain the night, so to take care of it. That's all right, said Hope, puzzled. Where is your difficulty? A note came from the landlord of the inn this morning, saying that by direction of Mr. Bolton, that is Sydney, you know, he was sending the mummy in its case to Gartley on a lorry, and that it would arrive at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Well, asked Hope, still puzzled. Well, she rejoined impatiently, can't you see how strange it is that Sydney should let the mummy out of his sight after guarding it so carefully, not only from Malta to England, but all the night in Piersdale at the hotel? Why doesn't he bring the mummy here himself and come with the lorry? There is no explanation. The letter from Sydney Bolton, it said nothing. None, he wrote yesterday, as I stated, saying that he would keep the case in the hotel and send it in the morning. Did he use the word send or the word bring? He said send. Then that shows he did not intend to bring it himself. But why should he not do so? I dare say he will explain when he appears. I am very sorry for him when he does appear, said Lucy seriously, for my father is furious. Why, this precious mummy, for which so much has been paid, might have been lost. Pooh! Who would steal a thing like that? A thing like that is worth nearly £1,000, said Lucy in a dry tone. And if anyone got wind of it, stealing would be easy, since Sydney appears likely has sent on the case unguarded. Well, let us go in and see if Sydney arrives with the case. They passed out the garden and then sauntered round to the front of the house. There, standing in the roadway, they beheld a ponderous lorry with a rough-looking driver standing at the horse's head. The front door of the house was open, so that the mummy case had apparently arrived before its time, and had been taken to Braddock's museum while they were chatting in the kitchen garden. Did Mr. Bolton come with the case? Asked Lucy, leaning over the railing and addressing the driver. No one came, miss, except myself and 2 maids, who have taken the case indoors. The driver jerked a coarse thumb over his shoulder. Was Mr. Bolton at the hotel, where the case remained for the night? No, miss. That is, I don't know who Mr. Bolton is. The landlord of the Sailor's Rest told me and my mates to take the case to this here house, and we done it. That's all I know, miss. Strange, murmured Lucy, walking to the front door. What do you think, Archie? Isn't it strange? Hope nodded. But I dare say Bolton will explain his absence, said he, following her. He will arrive in time to open the mummy case along with the professor. I hope so, said Miss Kendall, who looked much perplexed. I can't understand Sydney abandoning the case when it might so easily have been stolen. Come in and see my father, Archie. And she passed into the house, followed by the young man, whose curiosity was now aroused. As they entered the room, the 2 men who had taken in the case blundered out and shortly drove away on the lorry towards Jessam railway station. In the museum they found Braddock, purple with rage, and swearing vigorously. He was staring at a large packing case, which had been set up against the wall, while beside him crouched Cockatoo, holding chisels and hammers and wedges necessary to open the trove. So the precious mummy has arrived, father, said Lucy, who saw the professor was furious. Are you not pleased? Pleased, pleased? Shouted the angry man of science. How can I be pleased when I see how badly the case has been treated? See how it has been bruised and battered and shaken? I'll have action against Captain Harvey of the Diver if my mummy has been injured. Sidney should have taken better care of this so precious of an object. What does he say? Asked Archie, glancing round the museum to see if the delinquent had arrived. Say, shouted Braddock again, and snatching a chisel from the cockatoo. Oh, what can he say when he is not here? Not here, said Lucy, more and more suspicious and surprised at the unaccountable absence of Braddock's assistance. Where is he then? I don't know. I wish I did. I'd have him arrested for neglecting to watch over this case. As it is, when he comes back, I'll dismiss him from my employment. He can go back to his infernal laundry and work with his old witch of a mother. But why wasn't Bolton coming back, sir? Asked Hope sharply. Braddock struck a furious blow to the head of the chisel to which he inserted into the case. I want to know that. He brought the case to Sailor's Rest and should have come on with it this morning. Instead of doing so, he tells me the landlord, that is, a most unreliable man, to send it on. My most precious mummy, the mummy that has cost me £900, cried Braddock, worked furiously at battering the chisel as though it were Bolton's head. It is left to be stolen by any scientific thief that comes along. While the professor assisted Cockatoo loosen the lid of the packing case, a mild voice was heard at the door. Lucy turned, as did Archie, to see a widow Anne, in fact, curtsying on the threshold of the door. Braddock himself took no notice of her entrance, being occupied with his task, and even while doing it, swore scientifically under his breath. He was furious against Bolton for neglect and duty, and Hope rather sympathized with him. It was a serious matter to have left a valuable object like a green mummy to rough care of laborers. I beg your pardon, my lady, whimpered Widow Anne, who looked more lean and rusty and dismal than ever, but has my Sid come home? I saw the cart and the coffin. Where's my boy? Coffin, coffin, bellowed Braddock, angrily between thunderous blows. What do you mean by calling this case a coffin? Well, it do hold one of the most camphoured corpses, sir, she said. Mrs. Bolton, with another curtsy. My boy Sid told me as much before he went for the furrin parts. Have you seen him since he returned? Lucy questioned, while Braddock and Cockatoo strained at the lid, now nearly off. Why, I ain't set eyes on him, moaned the widow dismally, and the summer tells me I never will. Don't talk rubbish, woman, said Archie tartly, for he did not wish Lucy to be upset again and again by this ancient ghoul. Woman, indeed, sir. I have for you, I have, you know. No. The widow jumped and quavered as the lid in the packing case fell off to the floor with a bang. Oh, lor, sir. The start did give me. You did give me quite a start. But Braddock had no eyes for her and no ears for her any more. He pulled lustily at the straw packing and soon discovered the floor was littered with rubbish. But no green case appeared. No mummy. Suddenly, Widow Anne shriveled again. There's my Sid, dead on with my Sid. Dead, dead, dead. Chapter 5, Mystery. After one cry of agony from Widow Anne, there was silence for quite 1 minute. The terrible contents of the packing case started and terrified all present. Faint and white, Lucy clung to the arm of her lover to keep herself from sinking to the ground, as Mrs. Bolton had done. Archie stared at the grotesque rigidity of the body as though he had been changed into stone, while Professor Braddock stared likewise, scarcely able to credit the evidence of his eyes. Only the Kanka was unmoved and squatted on his arms, indifferently surveying the living room and the dead. The savage, he could not be expected to have the nerve of a civilized man. Braddock, who had dropped his chisel and hammer in the first movement of surprise, was the quickest to recover his powers of speech. The sole question he asked revealed the marvelous egotism of a scientist, nominated by one idea. Where is the mummy of Inca Caxus? He murmured with a bewildered air. Widow Anne, groveling on the floor, pulled her gray locks into wild confusion and uttered a cry of mingled rage and grief. He asks that? He asks that? She cried, stammering and choking, when he has murdered my poor boy Sid? What's that? Demanded Braddock sharply, and recovering from a veritable stupor, which the disappearance of the mummy and the sight of its dead assistant had thrown him into. Kill your son? How could I kill your son? What advantage would it have given me had I killed your son? God knows, sobbed the old woman. But you, Mrs. Bolton, you are raveling and raving, said Hope hastily, and strove to raise her from the floor. Let Miss Kendall take you away, and you go. Lucy, this sight is too terrible for your eyes. Lucy, inarticulate with a nervous fear, nodded and tottered towards the door of the museum, but Widow Anne refused to be lifted to her feet. My boy is dead, she wailed. My Sid is a corpse, as I saw him in my dream, in the coffin, cut into pieces. Rubbish, rubbish, interrupted Braddock, peering into the depths of the packing case. I can see no wound. Mrs. Bolton leaped to her feet and, with an agility surprising for so aged a woman, let me find the wound, she screamed, showing herself forward. Hope caught her back and forced her towards the door. No, the body must not be disturbed until the police see it. The police? Ah, yes, the police, remarked Braddock quickly. We must send for the police to Pierside and tell them my mummy has been stolen. That my boy has been murdered, screeched Widow Anne, waving her skinny arms, and striving to break from Archie. You wicked old devil, to kill my darling Sid. If I hadn't gone to them furrin parts, he wouldn't have a crop now, but I'll have the lawver. You'll be hanged. The lawyer and the law will take care of you. Braddock lost his patience under the torrent of an unjust accusation and rushed towards Mrs. Bolton, dragging Cockatoo by the arm. In less time than it takes to tell, he had swept both Archie and the widow up into the hall, where Lucy was trembling and Cockatoo, by his master's orders, was locking the door. Not a thing shall be touched or torched until the police come. Hope you like a witness that I hope that you are witness that I have never meddled with the dead. You were present when I opened the packing case. You have seen that the useless body has been substituted for a valuable mummy. And yet this old witch dares. Braddock stamped and grew incoherent with sheer rage. Archie soothed him, leaving to go of Widow Anne's arm to do so. Hush, hush, said the young woman quietly. The poor woman does not know what she's saying. I'll go for the police. No, interrupted the professor sharply. Cockatoo can go for the inspector of Pierside. I shall call the village constable. Meanwhile, you keep the key to the museum. He dropped it into Hope's breast pocket. So that you and the police may be sure that the body has not been touched. Widow Anne, go home. He turned angrily to the old creature, who was now trembling after her burst of rage. And don't dare to come here again until you ask pardon for what you have said. I want to be near my poor boy's corpse, wailed the widow Anne, and I am very sorry, Professor. I didn't mean to. But you have, you witch. Go away. And he stamped. But by this time, Lucy had recovered her self-possession, and had been sorely shaken by the sight of the dead. Leave her to me, she observed, shaken by the sight of the dead. Leave her to me. Taking Mrs. Bolton's arm and leading her towards the stairs, I shall take her to my room and give her some brandy. Father, you must make some allowance for her natural grief. And Braddock stamped again. Take her away, he cried testily, and keep her out of my sight. It is not enough to have lost an invaluable assistant and a costly mummy of infinite historical and archaeological value without my being accused of... Oh, the professor choked on his rage and shook his hands and his air. Seeing that he was unable to speak, Lucy seized the opportunity of the lull in the storm and hurried the old woman, sobbing and moaning, up the stairs. By this time, the shrieks of Mrs. Bolton and the wordy wrath of Braddock had drawn the cook and her husband along with the household from the basement to the ground floor. The sight of their surprised faces only added to the master's anger, and he advanced furiously. Go downstairs again. Go down, I tell you. But if there's nothing wrong, sir, ventured the gardener timidly. Everything is wrong. My mummy has been stolen or lost. Mrs. Bolton has been murdered. The police are coming and... He choked again. But the servants waited to hear no more. The mere mention of the words murderer and police sent them, pale-faced and startled, down to the basement, where they huddled like a flock of sheep. Braddock looked around for hope, but he found that she had opened the door to the front of the house and had vanished. But he was too distracted to think why Archie had gone, and there was much to do in putting things straight. Beckoning to Cockatoo, he stalked to the side of the room and scribbled a pencil note on the inspector's police at Pierside, telling him of what had happened and asking him to come at once to the pyramids with his underlings. This communication he dispatched by Cockatoo, who flew to get his bicycle. In short time, he was riding at top speed to Brefort, which was on his side of the river, facing Pierside. There he would catch a ferry across to the town and deliver the terrible message. Having done all that he could until the police came, Braddock walked out the front door and into the roadway to see if Archie was in sight. He could not see the young man, but as luck would have had it, and by one of those coincidences which are much more common than is suspected, he saw the Gartley doctor walking briskly past. "Hi," shouted the professor, who was purple in the face and perspiring profusely. "Hi there, Mr. Dobson. I want you. Come, hurry, man." He ended in a testy rage, and the doctor, knowing Braddock's eccentricities, advanced with a smile. He was a slim, dark medical practitioner with an amiable countenance which argued of no mighty intelligence. "Well, Professor," he remarked quietly, "do you want me to attend to you for apoplexy? Take your time, my dear sir. Take your time." He patted the scientist on the right shoulder so as to soothe his clamorous rage. "You are already purple in the face. Don't let your blood rush to your head." "Robinson, you are a fool," shouted Braddock, declaring at the suave looks of a doctor. "I am in perfect health. Damn you." "Damn you, sir. Then Kendall, she is quite She is quiet, well, also, but Bolton. Oh, Robinson looked disinterested. Has he returned with your mummy? Mummy? Bellowed Braddock, stamping like an insane Cupid. The mummy hasn't arrived. Really, Professor, you surprise me, said the doctor mildly. I'll surprise you more, growled Braddock, dragging Robinson into the garden and up the steps. Gently, gently, my dear sir, said the doctor, who really began to think that much learning had made the professor mad. Didn't Bolton? Bolton is dead, you fool. Dead? The doctor nearly tumbled backward down the steps. Murdered. At least I think he is murdered. At all the events, he arrived here today in the packing case, which should have contained my green mummy. Come in and examine the body. At once. No, Braddock pushed back the door at the doctor just as fiercely as he had dragged him forward. Until the constable comes, I want to see him, and I want to see the body first, and to observe that nothing has been touched. I have sent to Pierside for the inspector to come. There will be all sorts of trouble, cried Braddock despairingly, and my work, most important work, will be delayed just because the silly young ass Sidney Bolton chose to be murdered. And the professor stormed up and down the hall, shaking impotent arms in the air. Good heavens, stammered Robinson, who was young in years and somewhat new to his profession. You must be mistaken. Mistaken? Shouted Braddock with another glare. Come and see that poor fellow's body then. He is dead, murdered. By whom? Hang you, sir, how should I know? In what way has he been murdered? Stabbed, shot, or I don't know. Such a nuisance to lose a man like Bolton, an invaluable assistant. What shall I do without him? I really don't know. And his mother has been here, making no end of fuss. Can you blame her? Said the doctor, recovering his breath. She is his mother, after all, and poor Bolton was her only son. I'm not denying the relationship. Confound you, snapped the professor, ruffling his hair until it stood up like the crest of a parrot. But she needn't. He glanced through the open door and then rushed to the threshold. Here is Hope and Painter. Come in. I have the doctor here. Hope, you have the key. You observe Constable, and Mr. Hope has the key. Open the door. Let us see the meaning of this dreadful crime. Crime, sir? Queried the constable, who had heard that Braddock was known from Hope, but now wished to hear from Braddock and what he had to say. Yes, crime, you idiot. I have lost my mummy. But I thought, sir, that a murder... Oh, of course, gabbled the professor, as if death was quite a minor consideration. Bolton's dead, murdered, I suppose, as he could scarcely have nailed himself down in a packing case. But it is my precious mummy I am thinking of. Painter. A mummy, if you know what a mummy is, that cost me £900. Go in, man. Go in and don't stand there gaping. Don't you see that Mr. Hope has opened the door? I have sent Cockatoo to Pierside to notify the police. They will soon be here. Meanwhile, the doctor, you can see, has examined the body, and Painter here can give his opinion as to who stole my mummy. The assassin stole the mummy, said Archie, as the four men entered the museum, and substituted the body of the murdered man. That is all ABC, snapped Braddock, issuing the vast room. But we want to know the name of the assassin, if we are to avenge Bolton and get back my mummy. Oh, what a loss! I have lost £900, or say 1,000, considering the cost of bringing the Inca Cacus to England. Archie forbore to remind the professor as to who had really lost money, as the scientist was not in a fit state to be talked to reasonably, and seemed much more concerned, because of his Peruvian relic, of humanity, which had been lost, than for the terrible death of Sidney Bolton. But by this time, Painter, a fair-haired young constable of small intelligence, was examining the packing crate and surveying the dead. Dr. Robinson also looked with a professional eye, and Braddock, wiping his purple face and gasping with exhaustion, sat down on a stone sarcophagus. Archie, folding his arms, leaned against the wall and waited quietly to hear what the experts in crime and medicine would say. The packing case was deep and wide and long, made of tough teak and banded at intervals with iron bands. Within, this was a case of tin, which, when it had held the mummy, had been soldered up, impervious to all air and water. But the unknown person who had extracted the mummy and replaced it by a murdered man's body had cut open the tin can with some sharp instrument. There was straw around the tin casing and straw within, amongst which the body of the unfortunate young man was placed. Rigor mortis had set in, and the corpse, with straight legs and hands placed stiffly by its side, lay against the back of the tin casing, surrounded more or less by the straw packing, or at least by so much as the professor had not torn away. The face looked dark, the eyes were wide open and staring. Robinson stepped forward and ran his hand round the neck. Uttering an ejaculation, he removed from the woolen scarf which the dead man had probably worn to keep himself from catching cold, and those who looked or saw that red-colored window cord was tightly bound around his throat, and was likely what caused his death. "The poor devil has been strangled," said the doctor quietly. "See, the assassin has left the bowstring on, and had the courage to place over it this scarf, which belonged to Bolton." "How do you know that, sir?" asked Painter heavily. "Because Widow Anne knitted that scarf for Bolton before he went to Malta. He showed it to me, laughingly, remarking that his mother evidently thought that he was going to Lapland." "When did he show it to you, sir?" "Before he went to Malta, of course," said Robinson in a mild surprise. "You don't suppose he showed it to me when he returned?" "When did he return to England?" he asked the professor, as an afterthought. "Well, he returned yesterday afternoon about 4 o'clock, replied Braddock. "Then, from the condition of the body, the doctor felt the dead flesh, he must have been murdered last night." With your permission." Painter examined the corpse. The constable shook his head. "No, don't examine it yet. You'd better wait, sir. Wait until the inspector comes," he said in his unintelligent way. "Poor Sid. Why, I knew him. He was at school with me. And now he's dead. Who killed him? Who killed him?" None of his listeners could answer this question. All right, my friends, that is the end of another chapter. When we continue, we will be reading chapter 6, as we have read chapters 4 and 5 today. I hope you're enjoying the story. It does have a bit of charm to it and a bit of suspense, for sure, now that we know the mummy is missing and we have a dead body. Until next time, this has been Indiana Homes. Love to you all.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.